Openness, a flatness, quiet beauty.
Walking on the Somerset Levels, you can feel that history just soaking up through your feet.
It's crisscrossed by ditches, by drains, by reens as they're called locally.
So what it produces is lovely hay meadows, wildflowers, and it's that produces some of the best grass-fed beef and lamb anywhere in the country.
"8,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, rising seas submerged the lowlands, creating mudflats and salt marshes as far inland as Glastonbury. Hunter-gatherer communities lived on islands and ridges in this vast wetland landscape. Gradually, freshwater reed beds and wet woodland replaced the marshes and formed the first layers of peat. The waterlogged peat has miraculously preserved organic remains. Like the wooden god dolly, the earliest human figurine found in the UK, and wooden trackways used by prehistoric farmers to cross the wetland. Older than the pyramids, the trackways crisscrossed the wetlands, giving access to abundant fish and game, and were sites for offerings to the gods. The most famous is the Sweet Track, almost 6,000 years old. It's the oldest surviving timber structure in the UK. In 1892, Arthur Bullard discovered the preserved remains of an Iron Age settlement, now known as the Glastonbury Lake Village. It was built at the edge of a stand of alder, birch and willow, and surrounded by a swamp landscape of reeds, sedge and open water. The incredible preservation on the site gives us our most complete evidence of Iron Age life, including the violent nature of the inhabitants who collected the heads of their enemies. The first people to drain the wetlands for agriculture were the Romans. At Ilchester, a Roman fort and later a town controlled the road network around the wetlands. On the coast, the Romans developed a thriving salt industry with a criminal sideline in coin forging. Quantities of pewter and bronze vessels have been found buried in the wetlands. The Shapwick hoard of over 9,000 silver coins was found at a Roman villa on the Polden Hills. The rising seas eventually overwhelmed the Roman sea defences, returning large parts of the floodplain to marsh and mudflats. In 878 AD, the swamps around the island of Athelney gave King Alfred a last refuge from an invading army of Danish Vikings. From Athelney, Alfred mounted an effective resistance movement, defeated the Danes, and forced their leader to be baptised at Allah. In gratitude for his victory, Alfred founded a monastery on Athelney and encouraged learning and legal reform throughout the land. The wetlands were tamed by the abbots of Glastonbury, Muchelney and Athelney, and the Bishop and Dean of Wells. They reclaimed the coastal marshes, canalised the rivers, and erected flood defences. The landscape they created still exists largely unchanged today. The profits from this new land allowed the building of opulent architecture. At Glastonbury, the abbey promoted itself to medieval pilgrims by creating myths and legends, including the faked discovery of the grave of King Arthur. Flooding has always been a characteristic of this landscape. The Industrial Revolution finally brought the ability to tame the flood. Today, the Environment Agency and the internal drainage boards carefully manage the water levels for flood protection and to ensure a balance of benefits to agriculture and the natural environment. In the Brew Valley, peat for fuel has been dug by hand since Roman times. But since the 1950s, burning peat for fuel has declined. Extraction has been mechanised, and peat is now used extensively for horticulture. Today, much of the extraction is done by large machines. The traditional willow growing and basket making of the southern moors has had its ups and downs. But with an eye on new markets, design and quality, the industry survives today due to the passion and determination of all those involved. The fields, reens and nature reserves of the Levels and Moors are home to rare flora and fauna, particularly wetland birds. This landscape has constantly changed. Local people have used and altered the wetlands and have always had to be adaptable and resilient. But rising sea levels and climate change will pose new challenges. A living landscape to celebrate and cherish.